Do you believe that there were government agencies involved in the deaths of your father and uncle?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there was government agencies involved, not only in the death of my uncle, but the cover-up. And, I'm an attorney. If just with the evidence, without doing any discovery, with the evidence out there now that is accumulated about my uncle's death, there's over 1 million documents. Many of the people involved have made confessions, including E. Howard Hunt, David Atlee Phillips, David Morales, Charles Harrelson, Woody's father, who was, involved peripherally in it, and many, many others who were involved have confessed. But also, there's hundreds of thousands of documents that show what happened, and you have a 60-year CIA effort to make sure nobody sees that.
Okay, so can you tell us what, one, you think happened based on those documents and based on what those people said, and then also what the CIA has done to squash those voices?
I mean, the best evidence is that the CIA was involved in a project to assassinate Castro. And in order to promote that project, they recruited there was a CIA station chief in Miami, and the head of the project was a guy called Bill Harvey, who hated my father. My father and him just tangled with each other from the beginning. And my father was Attorney General, but he was also overseeing the CIA. And Harvey hated my father, and my father extremely disliked him. And Harvey was running the Cuba project, including the Assassination project, and he recruited 3 big mob families to help him assassinate Castro. Santos Traficante from Tampa, Florida, and Sam Giancana from Chicago, and Carlos Marcello, who was the Dallas and New Orleans crime chief. And
these are Italian mafia families or Cuban?
Well, actually, Carlos Marcella is of Italian descent, but he was Tunisian. He was born in. He's a very interesting character. My father once, at one point, they deported him because he was here illegally, and he was a tiny little guy, and he ran the whole mob family, the mob from Dallas to New Orleans.
Wow.
My father, at one point...
Which mob, though? The Italian mob? Or?
Yeah, those are the 3 most powerful mafia families.
Wow.
And the reason they were involved is they all had casinos in Havana.
Got it.
And when Castro, that was this big thing. In fact, when I've talked to Castro, I've met with him a number of times.
Really?
Yeah, and I asked him, are you getting capitalism in it back? And he said, yeah, we're going to get it, carefully bring it back, but never the casinos. And the casino, because he thought that had corrupted the whole country.
So this is interesting. So there's the interest from the Italian mafia families because they're profiting off these casinos. Americans are flying down there. They're spending tons of money in these casinos. They're extracting
they were
everything.
making millions on those casinos.
So they're incentivized to get him the fuck out of here. So it's easy for the U.S. government.
So they can go back and bring the casinos back.
I get it.
They want to turn into Vegas.
Okay.
So they and Bill Harvey, the CIA agent, had a liaison to all of those mobs, and that guy was named Johnny Roselli. And Johnny Roselli was actually murdered, I think, in 73 when Congress reopened the Warren Commission. And it's called the Church Committee, and they tried to, actually Gary Hart, who I've talked to about this, they subpoenaed Johnny Roselli. He was supposed to come talk to the committee, and he never showed up. And then his body was found in a 55-gallon oil drum, chopped into pieces, floating in Biscayne Bay.
Damn.
But he had also been involved in a weird way in my father's assassination. Now, I always thought that Sirhan killed my father.
Can we give a little context to your father's death? Okay, your father was
so what
running
happened?
for president.
My uncle, my father, in 1960, ran my uncle's campaign. He was my grandfather, Joseph Kennedy, made a lot of money in banking and in owning a studio, one of the biggest studios.
Yeah, he
in
was
Hollywood.
making films. I didn't even realize
Yeah,
that.
he was a big filmmaker. They weren't good films, by the way.
Yeah.
They were family films at that time, and it was like Tarzan, but all clean, that you could show in theaters across the Midwest. That was his business plan. It was part of RKO. My grandfather, after my uncle's death, the CIA tried to smear my grandfather by starting this rumor that he had been a bootlegger.
That's what I was about to ask.
He was never a bootlegger.
So this was, to me, common knowledge my whole life. I was like,
of
the
course,
Kennedys made their money.
yeah.
And then I start doing some research on you, and I find out that there was money made in alcohol, but it was through exclusive deals when Prohibition dropped.
Yeah,
right?
he and Jimmy Roosevelt, who was the president's son, when they knew, because the way that they got rid of Prohibition is you had to get, I think 26 states had to reject, was it the 16th Amendment or 17th Amendment, the one that, illegalized it. So you had to have state by state adopt laws saying we want to get rid of that Prohibition.
Yeah.
And when it got close to the end, and they knew they were going to win it, my grandfather and Jimmy Roosevelt went over to Scotland and they bought Pinch, which was a very high quality brand of Scotch. And they took all the inventory and they shipped it over to warehouses on the Canadian border with the U.S.
So it was ready to go.
So the night that Prohibition ended, they were shipping a high-quality whiskey to everybody. But that's his only involvement with it.
And then I think he sold that company later on for a lot of money.
He was conscience-stricken about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He didn't think he should be selling alcohol. And he sold it not...
For religious purposes, or because it was
just it was like a sin enterprise, essentially what they'd call a sin enterprise, and he didn't, he made a lot of statements about I don't feel good about this.
So he overcorrects and starts making family films, which suck apparently. But
Well, I don't think he was making family films for, I don't know, whether he was making for moral reasons or whether it was just a marketing strategy. There were all these theaters in the Midwest that didn't want to see women in stockings, to see their ankles, right, and that kind of stuff.
He was Tyler Perry before Tyler Perry.
Exactly.
Okay, so CIA starts to smear.
So after he died, there was a guy who worked for the CIA, had been the Havana bureau chief for the New York Times, and his job for the next 30 years was smearing my family.
And he's working for the Times.
He was, he had been. His cover had been New York Times bureau chief in Havana before he just came out of the closet and said, I actually work for the CIA.
Wow.
And then he transferred to Langley, and that was his job. And there was a whole cottage industry of Kennedy books that came out. And he's the one that started this rumor that my uncle, or that they had, my family, my grandfather had gotten Sam Giancana to fix the election in Chicago.
I've seen an entire one-hour documentary.
So
That is all baloney.
on like the History Channel.
And if you think about it, when I was, and then Giancana was angry because my father tried to put him in jail.
Yeah.
My father had 6 FBI agents follow me. When he left his home in the morning, they'd sit behind him in the movie theaters. They'd get the table next to him when he went out. They ruined his life. And but the thing is, when I was a kid, maybe 5 or 6 year old kids, there's pictures of me sitting on my mother's lap in the front row of the Rackets Committee hearing, which my father was running. My uncle was a senator. He was the head of that committee. My father was his counsel. And my father, grilling Sam Giancana. I was there. Giancana took the Fifth Amendment over 100 times. My father was ridiculing him and saying, he said, do you hang people, is it true that you hang your enemies on meat hooks? And Giancana laughed, and my father said to him, you're giggling like a little girl. So they hated each other.
Despise one another.
So now, what this rumor, this is 1 year before the election. He's doing that to Giancana. Well, the idea that Giancana, then my father would then go bribe Giancana to fix the...
1 year before JFK won the election?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and my father ran the campaign for him.
Yeah.
So the idea that my father would go from that hearing room where, the mob hated him, that somehow he would convince the mob to
fix the election.
To fix the election. Now, was the election in Chicago fixed? Probably.
How?
Well, because Daley fixed all the elections. And
Daley, you said?
Mayor Daley. He fixed the Democratic elections in Chicago, and the Republicans fixed them in Southern Illinois. So they were all fixed, and in fact, they would wait for each other.
What does that mean, fix? Explain, how do you do it?
Have dead people voting, have, all of the different ways to get rid of ballot. A million different ways. I mean, they found ballots in the Chicago River. So, but they were mainly interested in the down ballot contest. So
down ballot means
judges, the people who were governing Chicago. That's what he was mainly interested in. But here's the thing. When the election was over, some of the Republicans said, they fixed it. So Daley said, let's do a recount of the entire state, and I will personally pay for the recount. And the Republican election commission, which was run by Republicans, voted unanimously to not do that.
Why?
Because they knew that an account would
we both get
disclosed to everybody. Yeah. But here, the bottom line punchline is that even if my uncle had lost Illinois, he would have still won the election.
Okay. So that's another CIA smear. Why is the CIA? Why do they hate you guys so much? What is it about the Kennedys?
There was a fit, and I wrote a book about this. This 60-year fist fight between my family and the CIA. It started, I think, in 1955. My uncle was appointed to a commission run by it's called a Hoover Commission that looked at what the CIA was doing. And the CIA originally was created as an espionage agency. It wasn't supposed to do dirty tricks. Espionage means spying. It means data collection and analytics. And that's why it was started.
Abroad, right?
Its charter forbids it from operating in the United States, from propagandizing Americans, from doing anything in this country. Yes. Which it violates constantly.
Yeah.
But its charter prohibits that. So it wasn't supposed to do dirty tricks. And it's Alan Dulles, who was essentially the first director, manipulated, and he had been at the OSS, which was
precursor to.
Yeah, but after the war, Congress and the Senate, Republicans, Democrats, said we can't have a secret spy agency in this country, because that's what totalitarian regimes do. That's the Stasi in East Germany. It's the KGB. It's PEEP in Chile. It's Savak in Iran. And, the only totalitarian regimes have spy agencies. So and everybody agreed on that. And then Truman got in there and realized, okay, now we have one big bomb, right, that we can drop on the rest of the world. But you can't do that in all of these little these little brush fire rebellions that are happening. We have to have a way to fight these wars without dropping the bomb on everybody.
Yeah.
And so they, realized the cheapest way to do that is let the CIA go.
Handle all of it.
To fix the elections, to assassinate leaders. They weren't supposed to assassinate anybody, but they started almost immediately.
Who was number one that they took out?
Well, they deposed Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. So the agency was started in 1947. And they began immediately overthrowing governments. The two most famous one are Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran. He was the first democratically elected leader of Iran in its 8,000-year history.
Whoa.
And then the next year they overthrew, and they did that because he loved the United States, Mossadegh. And in fact, he threw the British out because he thought Churchill was trying to overthrow him. And his aides were saying the U.S. is going to do it too, and he said no. The U.S. is was a colonial nation itself, and it threw it off, and they're idealistic. They're on our side. He made a big mistake. Dulles sent Kermit Roosevelt over there, and they overthrew him. And then the next year, they because Dulles, before he was at the CIA, had been a lawyer at Sullivan Cromwell.
Okay.
And Texaco was one of his clients. His biggest client was United Fruit. And the next year, Jacobo Arbenz nationalized United Fruit in Guatemala. And so they went down and overthrew him the next year. And then they overthrew multiple governments in the next 2 years in Syria and Iraq and, all over the Mideast in order to control the oil supply.
Now, the incentive structure for overthrowing these governments, is it always monetary in terms of businesses that have been, purchased out there, or there's investing interest in the business out there like it was in Guatemala? Or is part of destabilization just like global colonial power, and this is how we need to keep things up?
I mean, what David Talbot, who wrote the best book about Dulles, it's called Devil's Chessboard. It's a really riveting book. If you start reading that book, you will not put it down. It's so crazy. But what he says in that book is that Dulles was incapable of distinguishing between American interests and the interests of the corporations who he had represented at Sullivan Cromwell. He honestly believed that whatever was good for U.S. corporations was good. Yeah. And, the CIA still has, that's what it does. It does regime change. It mainly funnels the money through USAID, which is a CIA puppet. They overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, which is really what this war is about. They spent $5 billion overthrowing that government and putting in, handpicking a U.S. government, which Victoria Nuland, who's the Deputy Secretary of State, they have her now. You can go and listen to this on the internet. Her giving orders of a voice mail of her, a voice recording of her giving orders to the U.S. ambassador of Ukraine a month before the coup, in which she's picking the cabinet, the new cabinet. So this, obviously upset the Russians because they don't want U.S. weapons systems in Ukraine.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, did the Russians support the democratically elected government that the Americans overthrew?
In Mossadegh?
No, in Ukraine.
Oh, in Ukraine?
Before 2013.
Yeah, that...
Like, is it possible that they also...
No.
Information systems to prop up...
Well, that was democratically elected.
But, is it?
Is that in quotes democratically elected? Is it possible?
No.
No,
the thing is that a large percentage of Ukrainians are Russian, are ethnic Russians. So in Donbass, Lugansk, Crimea.
Especially over there, yeah.
90% of the people there. And when, when after we overthrew their government and then started killing ethnic Russians, the new government killed 14,000, illegalized the language, killed 14,000 Russians. And, that's when Putin invaded Ukraine invaded Crimea, because Crimea, Vladivostok, is the biggest Russian port. It's the only warm water port.
Yeah.
And he saw, they were going to invite the U.S. Navy in there and take away our port that's been ours for 347 years. And that was, untenable for their national security. I'm not defending Putin. I don't think he's a good guy, but I think it's important for Americans to understand our role in the provocations that led up to the war.
What did you think of Putin?
And by the way, my son fought in that war.
Oh, really?
Yeah.